Welcome to another Murder Talk Radio. I am Parker Evans,
And I'm Victoria Evans.
and today we are talking about Ted Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber.
Theodore Ted John Kaczynski was born in Chicago on May 22nd, 1942. 10 years later, in 1952, the Kaczynski family moved to Evergreen Park, Illinois, and Ted transferred to Evergreen Park Central Junior High School. Neighbors reported that the Kaczynskis were, quote, civic-minded folks that sacrificed everything they had for their children.
Ted was reportedly well adjusted when he was young and had, until this, socialized well with other children, but he was exceptionally intelligent. IQ tests revealed his IQ to be over 150, and neighbors described him as smart but lonely even as a child. After he skipped the 6th grade, he didn't fit in, and he experienced bullying from his fellow students who were all older than he was. At Evergreen Park Community High, he played the trombone in the marching band, and he was also a member of the biology club, the coin club, the German club, and the math club. He hung out with other kids that were into science, and his friend group were known as the Briefcase Boys because they carried briefcases around with them, you know, as you do in high school. He also skipped the 11th grade, and he attended summer school so that he could graduate high school at the age of 15 as a national merit finalist.
He actually applied to Harvard and was accepted on a scholarship in 1958 at the age of 16. Really impressive. Other students at Harvard described Kaczynski as highly intelligent but extremely reserved. One Harvard classmate said that Kaczynski was unprepared for the Ivy League experience. Quote, they packed him up and sent him to Harvard before he was ready. He didn't even have a driver's license.
Kaczynski participated in a study at Harvard that sources allege was part of the MK Ultra project, a Central Intelligence Agency mind control research program. Subjects in this study were told by Harvard psychologists who was named Henry Murray that they would discuss their personal philosophies with another student, and they were then asked to write essays detailing their personal beliefs and aspirations. Those essays were then handed to someone who would belittle the subject using language that Murray called, quote, personally abusive. The content of the essays written by the subject was ammunition for these attacks. This was filmed, and it was later played back to the subjects to show them their own anger and rage. This so-called experiment lasted 3 years with someone verbally abusing and humiliating Ted Kaczynski on a weekly basis for over 200 hours in total.
Wow. Kaczynski survived these abuses, and he did earn a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics from Harvard in 1962. Then he enrolled at the University of Michigan, where he earned a master's degree in 1964 and a doctoral degree in mathematics in 1967. So still super successful and with a very impressive history from at such a young age. But like, what the? That's a crazy experiment.
Here's some quotes from professors who knew him. Professor George Piranian, I think that's how you pronounce that name, Piranian, so maybe Piranian, from the University of Michigan said, it is not enough to say he was smart, which that's a hell of a quote.
Yeah.
And Professor Peter Duran, also of the University of Michigan, said he was an unusual person. He was not like the other graduate students. He was much more focused about his work. He had a drive to discover mathematical truth.
Yeah, I mean, he got his doctoral degree in mathematics when he was 25.
Wow.
I'm embarrassed to think about what I was doing at 25. I got my bachelor's degree then. In 2006, Kaczynski said he felt the university had low standards, and he may have been referring to 1966 when he experienced several weeks of intense sexual fantasies about becoming female, and even decided to undergo a gender reassignment. He arranged a meeting with a psychiatrist, but changed his mind in the waiting room. In the emotional fallout of the blown off appointment, he became enraged and debated killing the psychiatrist.
And Kaczynski actually spoke about this, and he said, quote, "I felt disgusted about what my uncontrolled sexual cravings had almost led me to do, and I felt humiliated, and I violently hated the psychiatrist. Just then, there came a major turning point in my life. Like a phoenix, I burst from despair to a glorious new hope." And in late 1967, Kaczynski took a job at the University of California, Berkeley, teaching mathematics. By 1968, he was appointed assistant professor, and he was on a tenure track. But in spite of these career successes, outside the classroom, his teaching evaluations suggest that he was uncomfortable teaching. He reportedly taught straight from the textbook and refused to answer student questions, which is weird. And as a result, he was not liked by, his students.
That is really strange.
It is. I can't imagine teaching a class and not not answering student questions.
I mean, he was very young, but still.
Do you think he just ignored them?
I don't know. That's such a bizarre. I can't even imagine a teacher doing that. I've never had a teacher do that.
Like, is that how it went? Like, excuse me, professor, what did you mean when you said that? And turning to page 92.
Yeah, he must have just ignored them.
Yeah, that's weird. Anyway.
He's like, and I don't answer questions. Without explanation or warning, at the age of 28, Kaczynski resigned from his position on June 30th, 1969. Initially, he moved to his parents' home in Lombard, Illinois. 2 years later, in 1971, he moved to a remote cabin he built outside of Lincoln, Montana.
You can see a photo of this cabin that he built by clicking the link in the description or by exploring murderpm.com.
His cabin was described by a census worker as containing books, a bed, 2 chairs, storage trunks, and a gas stove. So, sounds pretty sparse.
Sounds amazing.
It does. It actually, the photo of it looks pretty peaceful.
Small, but yes.
He used an old bicycle to get around, and a volunteer at the local library said he visited frequently.
In 1975, Kaczynski started to commit acts of sabotage against real estate developments that were near his cabin, including both arson and booby trapping. And here's a quote from him from some of his writing. I believe this is from his manifesto. He said, "It's kind of rolling country, not flat. And when you get to the edge of it, you find these ravines that cut very steeply into cliff-like drop-offs. And there was even a waterfall there. It was about a 2-day hike from my cabin. That was the best spot until the summer of 1983. That summer, there were too many people around my cabin, so I decided I needed some peace. I went back to the plateau, and when I got there, I found they had put a road right through the middle of it. You just can't imagine how upset I was. It was from that point on I decided that rather than trying to acquire further wilderness skills, I would work on getting back at the system. Revenge."
Starting in 1978, Kaczynski began a series of increasingly sophisticated bombings. There were 16 of these in total. Kaczynski's first mail bomb was delivered to Buckley Christ,
Yeah, I think so.
A materials engineering professor at Northwestern University. On May 25th, 1978, a package with Christ's return address on it was found in a parking lot at the University of Illinois at Chicago.
So they found that package and then they quote-unquote returned it to Christ thinking that it, belonged to him. he immediately contacted campus police because he had not sent a package. And so seeing a return address that was not in his handwriting obviously would make someone very suspicious. An officer named Terry Marker opened it, which triggered the bomb, but the explosion only caused minor injuries. He stayed in Chicago after that May bombing in 1978. He worked with his father and brother at a foam rubber factory, but his brother had to fire him in August 1978 because he wrote insulting limericks about a female supervisor that he was romantically interested in. She described Kaczynski as intelligent and quiet, but said there was no romantic relationship between them.
Weird. That's some incel behavior. Kaczynski's second bomb was sent nearly 1 year after the first one, again to Northwestern University. This time it was concealed in a cigar box and left on a table, and again caused only minor injuries. And this time it was done to a graduate student named John Harris, who had just casually opened the package.
In 1979, another bomb was delivered to the cargo hold of a Boeing 727 that was owned by American Airlines. It was Flight 444 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., and a faulty timing mechanism prevented the bomb from going off. It sort of half detonated, but it only released smoke. Pilots diverted the flight and made an emergency landing. Authorities later said that the bomb, had it gone off, it had enough power to, quote, obliterate the plane.
It's scary. Kaczynski sent his next bomb inside of a copy of the book Ice Brothers. This was delivered to the president of United Airlines, Percy Wood, who received cuts and burns over most of his body. So Wood survived and died of natural causes 28 years later on June 23rd, 2008.
Ice Brothers is a story about the U.S. Coast Guard in World War II, operating off of the coast of Greenland. It's not known if there was some special meaning in this choice or if he just happened to have the book laying around. He was known to leave false clues in his bombs. Like in another bomb, he left a note that said, "Woo, W-U. It works. I told you it would." And he signed it RV. And that was another bomb that didn't detonate. He often used Eugene O'Neill $1 stamps as postage, and these were meant to be intentionally misleading. Even though he built them, there were fingerprints found on some of the devices that don't match Kaczynski.
U.S. postal inspectors who initially had jurisdiction over the case labeled him the junkyard bomber because of the recycled materials that he used to make the bombs. Like scrap that could be found almost anywhere, which I think is kind of smart. Kaczynski's bombs varied as he refined them over the years.
He did have a 150 IQ.
Yeah. Many of the bombs contain metal plates stamped with the initials FC, usually hidden in the pipe end cap. Kaczynski would later explain that the initials stood for Freedom Club. The FBI theorized that Kaczynski's crimes involved a theme of nature, trees, and wood. He included like bits of tree bark and branch in his bombs, which is kind of interesting. His selected targets included Percy Wood and Professor Leroy Wood. Crime writer Robert Graysmith cited his obsession with wood as a large factor in the bombings. I mean, he built a cabin himself and like lived out in the woods. I don't know.
Yeah.
Investigators later learned that the victims were chosen randomly through research he conducted at the library, which in my opinion doesn't actually seem random. It's like semi-random. if you're just picking the last name.
I mean, I would agree that they were semi-random, but to take quote unquote like revenge on the system of society, you could kind of pick almost anybody. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, the postal service and like airline workers, that doesn't seem particularly random.
A graduate student, random professors.
I don't know. It's connected to him, in my opinion, because of all the time he spent on universities. But I don't know.
In 1980, agents in the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit created a psych profile of the bomber that described a man with above average intelligence, connections to academia, and was later refined to describe a Luddite with academic degrees in a hard science. This startlingly accurate criminal profile was discarded by the FBI in 1983, and FBI analysts also developed a startlingly inaccurate profile in which the suspect was characterized as a blue-collar airplane mechanic.
Weird. I would love to know who came up with those profiles and why the first one was discarded. Like, someone must have been laughed out of the office or something. Because I know...
It'd be funny if they were both created by the same guy.
They were like, this is completely ridiculous, come up with something else, so he just basically forced himself to. I don't know. But I know that early on, the BAU wasn't necessarily taken seriously by everybody. In 1981, a package with the return address of a Brigham Young University professor of electrical engineering, Leroy Wood Berenson?
I guess.
Berenson?
Bearnson.
Berenson.
Berenson. Yeah.
This package was found in a hallway at the University of Utah. It was brought to the campus police and defused by a bomb squad. Then, in May 1982, the following year, a bomb was sent to Patrick C. Fisher, a professor of computer science at Vanderbilt University. Fisher was on vacation in Puerto Rico, but his secretary, Janet Smith, opened the bomb, which resulted in injuries to her face and arms.
Kaczynski's next two bombs targeted people at the University of California, Berkeley, where he used to work. Engineering professor Diogenes Angelikos was injured in a bombing that happened in July 1982. And in May 1985, John Hauser, who was a graduate student and a captain in the U.S. Air Force, lost 4 fingers and vision in his left eye, which did eventually return.
Wow.
His vision, not his fingers.
Sorry to laugh. Wow. A bomb sent to the Boeing Company in Auburn, Washington, was defused by a bomb squad in June of 1985. And then in November of the same year, Professor James V. McConnell and research assistant Niklaus Swino were both severely wounded after Swino opened a mail bomb addressed to McConnell.
In late 1985, a bomb was left in the parking lot of a computer store in Sacramento, California, killing 38-year-old store owner Hugh Scruton. A similar attack against a computer store happened in Salt Lake City, Utah, on February 20th, 1987. That bomb was disguised as a piece of lumber, and it injured Gary Wright when he attempted to pick it up and remove it from the parking lot. The explosion severed nerves in his left arm and sent hundreds of pieces of shrapnel into his body. And
Wow.
Kaczynski was spotted while planting the Salt Lake City bomb, which led to the now iconic sketch of the Unabomber as a hooded man with a mustache and aviator sunglasses.
What bomb number are we on at this point?
I'm not sure.
It's a lot. So at this point, he has successfully taken one life
Yep.
with all of the bombs that he sent, and it seems like, I mean, clearly each time they're more and more successful.
Yeah, I mean, the bombs got more sophisticated as he went along.
Kaczynski's father was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer in 1990 and committed suicide by shooting himself on October 2nd of the same year. In 1993, Kaczynski mailed a bomb to the home of Charles Epstein from the University of California, San Francisco, who lost several fingers. The same weekend, Kaczynski mailed the bomb to David Gelantner,
Gallanter.
Gelantner, a computer science professor at Yale University. Gelantner lost sight in his right eye, and he lost hearing in his right ear and 4 fingers from his right hand, which he remains without the use of to this day.
In 1994, Thomas J. Mosser was killed after opening a mail bomb sent to his home in New Jersey. In a letter that he wrote to the New York Times, Kaczynski explained that he targeted Mosser because of his public relations work after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. The next bomb resulted in the 1995 murder of Gilbert Brent Murray, who was president of the timber industry lobbying group California Forestry Association, and he was killed by a mail bomb that was addressed to the previous resident of the home, William Dennison, who had retired, but he got it and it killed him instead.
Also in 1995, Kaczynski mailed several letters to media outlets demanding a major newspaper print his 35,000-word essay called Industrial Society and Its Future, which is now known from the FBI as the Unabomber manifesto. Before the manifesto's publication, the FBI held many press conferences asking the public to help identify the Unabomber, and were convinced that Kaczynski was from the Chicago area because the first bombing had taken place there. And they also believed that he worked in or had some connection to Salt Lake City and had some association with the San Francisco Bay Area.
There was some controversy over whether the essay should be published at all and what guarantee anyone had that the bombings would stop if they did so. The Attorney General at the time, Janet Reno, and FBI Director Louis, I don't know how to say that name either, Freeh? F-R-E-E-H. They recommended publication, hoping that a reader would be able to identify the author based on the prose. And the Washington Post published the essay on September 19th, 1995. You can read it in full because we published it in murderpm.com, and it'll be in the links in the description. We'll put both the article itself and the link to our republication of Kaczynski's Industrial Society and Its Future.
Kaczynski used a typewriter to write his manifesto, capitalizing entire words for emphasis. He referred to himself as either we or FC for Freedom Club. There is no evidence that he worked with others, though. So again, I'm sure this was just to throw people off, or he really had some kind of complex thinking, like talking about himself in the third person or thinking he was more than one.
I think he was just trying to make it seem like it was a bigger movement than it was.
Right, that makes sense. Like the whole club.
Yeah. So I've read this, Industrial Society and Its Future. I thought it was interesting. I don't think it's a good justification for killing people with bombs, but the writing itself was really interesting, and it begins with the sentence, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race." The manifesto goes on to say that those who oppose industrial society must promote stress from within and promote an ideology that offers what he called a counter-ideal in nature. He claims that technology has had a destabilizing effect on society, has made life unfulfilling, and has also caused widespread suffering, which is, you know, if you've ever taken an antibiotic, I think you'll agree that it's also prevented a lot of widespread suffering. But Kaczynski was an expert on systems theory, and he argued that the erosion of human freedom is the natural result of industrial society as, quote, the system has to regulate human behavior closely in order to function. He said that reform of that system is impossible, and he said that it will break down if it cannot ultimately achieve significant control on an individual level. He also said that this was likely to be decided within the next 100 years, and he says that a successful revolution will only be possible when industrial society is sufficiently unstable. A significant amount of the essay is dedicated to politics. Kaczynski blames many of society's issues on leftists and discusses his belief that over-socialization and feelings of inferiority are the primary drivers of leftism, which he calls, quote, one of the most widespread manifestations of the craziness of our world, adding that leftism is in the long run inconsistent with wild nature, with human freedom, and with the elimination of modern technology. But he also criticizes conservatives, describing them as, quote, fools who whine about the decay of traditional values and yet enthusiastically support technological progress and economic growth.
James Q. Wilson, in a 1998 New York Times op-ed, wrote, quote, if it is the work of a madman, then the writings of many political philosophers are scarcely more sane. Kind of a compliment. He's, you know.
Yeah.
I also think that what he said, just a quick aside, Ted was writing about leftists, it's interesting that someone said he had an obsession with wood and like he wanted to live out kind of in the middle of nowhere, because even though he didn't target like eco sites, he kind of reminds me of the leftist eco-terrorist movement in a way.
I totally agree with you, but he was not a fan.
Interesting. Very much a loner. Further, John Q. Wilson wrote, quote, the Unabomber does not like socialization, technology, leftist political cause, or conservative attitudes. Apart from his call for an unspecified revolution, his paper resembles something that a very good graduate student might have written.
Well, he was a very good graduate student.
Right.
So the Attorney General and the FBI Director got their wish, and before the publication of Industrial Society and Its Future, Kaczynski's brother, David Kaczynski, was encouraged by his wife to follow up on their suspicions that his brother Ted was the Unabomber. I guess his wife really believed this, but David was kind of dismissive of the idea. But after the essay was published, David went through old letters from the 70s that Ted had written, which he was sending to newspapers in protest of the abuses of technology, and he found that they were very similar to the manifesto.
That's gotta be so bizarre.
His brother hired a private investigator named Susan Swanson from Chicago to investigate his suspicions about Ted as discreetly as possible, and not long after, he also hired an attorney from Washington, D.C. named Tony Bisceglie to organize the evidence that his PI acquired and to aid him in contacting the FBI about his brother. They wanted to protect Ted Kaczynski from the danger of an FBI raid because the debacles at Ruby Ridge and Waco had just occurred, and they were very worried that the FBI might, just go in and snipe their brother or set his cabin on fire or something.
I think they handled it well.
I agree. They handled it, as professionally as you could hope someone would handle turning in their brother.
Gotta be just really heartbreaking and difficult. In early 1996, an investigator working with Bisceglie contacted former FBI hostage negotiator and criminal profiler Clinton R. Van Zandt and asked him to compare the manifesto to typewritten copies of handwritten letters David had received from his brother. Van Zandt's analysis determined that there was better than a 60% chance that the same person had written the manifesto, which had now been published for half a year at that point, and Van Zandt recommended that they contacted the FBI immediately.
Donald Wayne Foster also analyzed the writing at the request of Kaczynski's defense team, and he also concluded that Kaczynski was the author. David Kaczynski tried to remain anonymous, but he was very quickly identified, and within a few days, an FBI team went out and interviewed him and his wife, along with their attorney, in Washington, D.C. David gave the FBI letters written by his brother in their original envelopes, which allowed the FBI task force on the Unabomber to use postmark dates to add more detail to their timeline of Ted's activities. David had assurances from the FBI that he'd be able to remain anonymous and his brother would not learn that he turned him in. But his identity was leaked almost immediately to CBS News in early April 1996. And CBS anchor Dan Rather called the FBI director, who requested 24 hours before CBS broke the story. The FBI conducted an internal investigation, but the source of that leak was never uncovered.
The FBI scrambled to finish the search warrant and have it issued by a federal judge in Montana. The FBI agents arrested an unkempt, disheveled, and filthy-looking Ted Kaczynski at his cabin on April 3rd, 1996.
We have a picture of this arrest in here, and disheveled and filthy-looking does not even begin to... He looks like he's been digging ditches all day with his hands or something.
Yeah, he really looks out of it.
He just has, dirt all over his face.
A very curious photo.
So, the FBI's search of his cabin revealed bomb-making components, 40,000 handwritten journal pages. 40,000 handwritten pages. I just had to repeat that because that's a lot. But they included notes from bomb-making experiments, and they also found a live bomb in his cabin. And they found what appeared to be the original handwritten manuscript of industrial society and its future.
The Unabomber investigation was the most expensive investigation in FBI history at the time. A 2000 report by the U.S. Commission on the Advancement of Federal Law Enforcement stated that the investigation cost over $50 million. After his capture, theories emerged about Kaczynski being the Zodiac killer who murdered 5 people in Northern California from 1968 to 69.
I just wanted to say that $50 million in the year 2000 would be about $92 million in today's money.
I wonder if it's still up there on the list of one of the most expensive, but...
It's gotta be. I mean, $90 million.
I wonder, though, that was in 2000, and this happened in the late 90s, so I wonder what 9/11 was like.
I have no idea.
Just comparison for the investigation. I don't know. Interesting question, though.
So, as you just said, after his capture, theories emerged about Kaczynski being the Zodiac killer who murdered 5 people in Northern California. But as we all know, the Zodiac killer is Ted Cruz.
Horrifying.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Um, that threw me off for a second. I was like, they found the Zodiac killer? Oh, Ted Cruz. Oh.
That's my favorite meme of all time, that Ted Cruz was the Zodiac killer.
He looks like the composite sketch, though. Like, he does.
He was a baby at the time, so he probably didn't do it.
That's horrifying. That's even crazier.
Just a murderous baby.
Yeah. That's creepy. Kaczynski's whereabouts could not be verified for all of the killings, and since the gun and knife murders committed by the Zodiac killer differed drastically from Kaczynski's bombings, authorities did not actually pursue him as a suspect. Robert Graysmith, who was the author of the book Zodiac, called the similarities, quote, fascinating but purely coincidental, and I'd have to agree with him.
Yeah, this time I'm going to agree with Robert Graysmith as well. A federal grand jury indicted Kaczynski in June of 1996 on 10 counts of illegally transporting, mailing, and using bombs. Kaczynski's lawyers, Montana federal public defenders Michael Donahoe and Judy Clark, attempted to enter an insanity defense to avoid the death penalty, but Kaczynski rejected their strategy, and on January 8th, 1998, he asked to dismiss his lawyers and hire Tony Serra as his counsel because attorney Serra had agreed not to use an insanity defense and instead promised that he would base the defense on Kaczynski's anti-technology views.
After this request was unsuccessful, Kaczynski tried to kill himself. Sally Johnson, the psychiatrist who examined him, diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, which I'm sure he was insulted by. Forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz said that Kaczynski was not psychotic, but had schizoid or schizoid-typal personality disorder.
In his 2010 book titled Technological Slavery, Kaczynski said that two prison psychologists who visited him frequently for 4 years told him they saw no indication that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and that the diagnosis was ridiculous and a political diagnosis. Some authors have suggested that Kaczynski's brother and mother purposely spread the idea that Kaczynski was mentally ill in an effort to try and save him from being executed.
Kaczynski pled guilty to all charges on January 22nd, 1998, accepting life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He later tried to withdraw this plea, arguing that he had been coerced by the judge, but his request was denied, and the denial was upheld by the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
In 2006, a bunch of items that were seized from Kaczynski's cabin were sold at what was called reasonably advertised internet auction. And the proceeds went towards the $15 million restitution that had been awarded to Kaczynski's victims. His correspondence and other personal papers were also auctioned, but they were redacted to remove Kaczynski's any references to Kaczynski's victims. Kaczynski tried to challenge those redactions as violations of his freedom of speech. Didn't work.
I'm so, as you know, very anti-censorship, and even that, you're auctioning off a killer's and like a terrorist's letters. I just find the redaction strange. Like, it's public information. I don't get it, but that's just me. I don't think that it's necessarily disrespectful or particularly respectful. Like, I don't think it's either. It just, the letter is what it is. And you're literally auctioning it, so what are you going to do?
That auction ran for 2 weeks in 2011 and raised over $230,000. The U.S. government also seized his cabin, which they put on display at a place called the Newseum, which is a horrible name.
Yeah, it is.
Horrible branding. That was in Washington, D.C., and then in late 2019, it was transferred to a nearby FBI museum.
Kaczynski was sentenced to 8 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Early in his imprisonment, Kaczynski befriended Ramzi Youssef and Timothy McVeigh. Interesting people to befriend. They were the perpetrators of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, respectively. The friendship lasted until McVeigh's execution in 2001.
On December 14th, 2021, Theodore John Kaczynski, then 79 years old, was transferred from the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, to the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, for undisclosed health reasons, and he died in federal custody there on June 10th, 2023. But according to anonymous sources, his death was actually a suicide by an unknown method, and he was 81 years old at the time.
An unknown method for suicide just makes me think poison, but you're supposed to do autopsies for prisoners, so...
It may mean that the anonymous sources didn't know the method.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Kaczynski's views have inspired generations of online communities of primitivists and neo-Luddites, and Kaczynski is also frequently referred to by eco-terrorists online.
So there you go. You mentioned that earlier, that you felt like
Yeah.
they had a lot in common, and the eco-terrorists agree, but Ted Kaczynski didn't. It's kind of funny.
It is. Some fascist and neo-Nazi groups also idolized him for his accelerationist views, but Kaczynski described fascism in his manifesto as a kook ideology, and he described Nazism as evil.
If you're not familiar with accelerationism, accelerationism is the idea of accelerating the collapse of the United States.
Anders Behring Breivik, responsible for the 2011 Norway shootings, published a manifesto that lifted large segments from industrial society and its future, with terms like leftists substituted with cultural Marxists and multiculturalists.
Kaczynski's correspondence now resides in the University of Michigan's Special Collections Library, and it includes letters that he exchanged with over 400 people since his arrest, along with replies that he received, legal documents, and other writing. In 2012, he responded to the Harvard Alumni Association's inquiry for the 50th reunion of the class of 1962 by listing his occupation as prisoner and his 8 life sentences as awards.
University of Michigan Dearborn philosophy professor David Skirbina,
That one's a weird one too. Skrbina.
University of Michigan Dearborn philosophy professor David Skirbina.
That's a weird name.
That is.
Skrbina.
Well, he helped compile Kaczynski's writings into the 2010 anthology called Technological Slavery, which included Kaczynski's original manifesto and letters between Skirbina and Kaczynski, and other essays too. Kaczynski updated his 1995 manifesto as Anti-Tech Revolution. Why and how? He did this to address advances in computers and the internet, and he advocates protest but not violence. In the 1996 U.S. presidential election, a satirical campaign called Unabomber for President was launched, which advocated Kaczynski for president through write-in votes. Various radical movements and extremists have been influenced by Kaczynski. His final resting place is unknown.
So, final thoughts?
Wow. Part of me thinks, what a waste of a person. Like, so intelligent, and he accomplished so much from a young age. And I just, what was he really saying? What did he really actually accomplish? He just hurt people, basically.
I have mixed, like you, I have mixed feelings on Kaczynski because he was clearly very smart. I don't agree with everything he wrote in his manifesto, but I do think that it's interesting.
Yeah.
He certainly was very intelligent. At the same time, nothing that he wrote in his manifesto, I don't think, justifies killing a bunch of people.
Absolutely not.
And they were kind of chosen at random. It's not like he even. There was only like one victim, the PR guy was associated with the Exxon Valdez. He seems to be the only target who was chosen for a specific reason. Everybody else seems like just kind of a random victim.
I mentioned earlier kind of comparing him to like an incel, but he never married. He never had kids. Like, I often wonder what his life was like besides being extremely lonely and just, writing. He had like, what, 40,000 pages when the FBI raided his cabin? Like, just alone, writing, plotting, fantasizing, like.
Something that differentiates him from incel killers is that he didn't kill any women.
Yeah, I mean, oh, I believe it was a secretary opened a package that was for someone else, that was for a man, and she like burned herself. But I mean, he didn't talk about hating women or anything like that. But
Well, he didn't target any either. That's more what
yeah,
I meant. He did injure that woman, but it was sort of an accident. He had no way of knowing that a secretary would accidentally set the bomb off. But he didn't target any women. They were all men.
it makes me wonder if he was like asexual because of his early fantasies about getting gender reassignment surgery. I have no idea, or maybe he was gay and wanted to be a woman. Like, I really don't know. That's something about him that interests me, like his personal life and his true deep desires, because he has this whole like manifesto that's this massive like plan to get back at the government for what they've done to our world and whatnot.
Well, not the government, but industrial society.
Sure. I just wonder. I don't know. He's clearly super lonely, and I'm not saying that people having families and kids and whatever makes them not feel lonely and makes them not to go out and do things, but I do find it curious that that didn't seem to be something he was interested in. I wonder if it was later in life, like after he was arrested and stuff.
I'm curious why you think that he was lonely. He doesn't really seem lonely to me.
I don't know, he seems lonely to me. We know a lot about his manifesto and the things that he did, but I don't feel like I really know a lot about him as an actual person.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. I'm just wondering if there's anything specific besides the fact that, he lived alone in a cabin in the woods that makes you think he was lonely.
I get you. I guess I just think that it has to be kind of lonely after, even from being a kid and like graduating or moving up in class early, so that he was always surrounded by people who were older than him, and then he goes to college and everyone's older than him, and like he gets a doctorate at age 25 and like goes to live alone in a cabin on a mountain or wherever it was.
He didn't like talking to his students, which makes me think he may have had social anxiety, although there's no real evidence for that. He may just have not liked people very much, which is there's also no evidence to support that per se, but I don't know. Like I said, I was just curious what made you think that he was lonely.
I don't know. I guess I just am curious about his personal relationships. I guess that's why I thought he was lonely, because like he seemed to struggle with gender identity and not be not have a lot of peers or people that he related to. I just kind of assumed that he would be lonely, but maybe he wasn't.
According to him, that struggle was a fairly brief thing, and they were based on sexual fantasies that he had.
Yeah, I don't know. He's a weird one for sure.
He is that, for sure. All right, well, that about wraps it up for us here at Murder Talk Radio. I'm Parker Evans.
And I'm Victoria Evans. Thanks for listening.